Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherri Davidoff.
And I'm Matt Durrin.
And we are here to talk about the Louvre heist.
Well, parts of it anyway.
Parts of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the Louvre heist is a physical security issue where criminals broke into the Louvre and stole fancy jewels worth many, many millions of dollars. But since the time that this occurred on October 19th, there have been extensive reports about security issues at the Louvre, not just physical security issues, but also technical security issues.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to be interviewed by YouTuber Hank Green recently about the physical security issues, so check that out. It was a really fun interview.
That was fun.
But today we are going to dig into the technical side of things. So, Matt, do you want to take it away and tell us a little bit about some of the issues that have popped up?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few. And after there is a large-scale attack on an organization like the Louvre, it's not uncommon for, the magnifying glass to turn back onto them.
People swarm.
Yeah, and all the little kind of like deficiencies or inconsistencies that they've had pretty much throughout their entire documented, career as a museum have started to kind of come to light. And what the headlines are really focusing on right now is a security audit that came back in 2014. Where they were talking about some of the passwords that were being used on the system. So, like their security camera system, as an example, had the password Louvre.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And we all know that that's silly. But if you see it in the news, it's like the security password on the camera was Louvre, but they're not really highlighting that that was in 2014.
Yeah, that was 11 years ago.
And in fact, we've combed through the reports, and there's little to no evidence that this was still the case in 2025. There were a couple like anecdotal reports, but the only hard evidence of that password being in place was from a security audit in 2014.
Well, and even that's a little fuzzy because the only people that have actually read that audit, aside from the people at the Louvre and the people that wrote it, was the French newspaper Libertine.
Liberation,
yeah.
And actually, I think that's frankly one of the biggest security issues of all. Their security reports were leaked to journalists.
Yeah.
I think that is a major issue. And we see that in data breaches sometimes where for example, and one of these security assessments of Target was leaked to the media after the fact. And that caused me to question, like, hey, are they having HR issues? Why are people leaking this sensitive information to the news? That's a major security issue in and of itself that can cause additional reputational damage. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's really just like pouring gasoline on the fire of public opinion.
Well, and when we talk about the Louvre, I mean, let's be honest about this. The fact that their tallest security system had the password Tallest and their camera system had the password Louvre 11 years ago. I mean, even if that was still the case today, that would not have stopped what happened at the Louvre during this robbery. I mean,
that's true.
This was a physical security problem, and it's something that we see, in physical pen testing all the time. I mean, guys showed up in high visibility vests. They looked like construction workers. They rolled in through a window, and they were out within 7 minutes. So, camera systems, security systems, I mean, they went off like they were supposed to, but it wouldn't have stopped anything. So, yes, it is funny. I'll admit that. Like, it's a nice little jab to the side to them, but I don't think it would have made a difference. But what it does do is highlight deficiencies that we still see today when we look at, overall infrastructure.
I mean, I'll debate you on this, Matt, because I think
it.
it's a major red flag. It means that you're not really fully auditing passwords. And to put it in context, though, in 2014, we at LMG were already doing pen tests.
Sure.
Our company was founded in 2009, and I had been doing pen tests for a couple of years prior to that, at least. But back in 2014, most organizations that were doing pen tests were higher security companies, like financial institutions, banks, maybe credit unions. They're regulated. We were starting to see healthcare organizations in the United States regularly doing pen tests as well, because HIPAA was really starting to come into effect. Obviously, it had been passed almost a decade prior, but it took a while to really pick up steam until after the HITECH Act came out in the United States. Not to geek out too much. It was around that time, actually, that we got our first major museum that we were asked to conduct a penetration test of.
And how'd that go?
Well, museums had some issues. And that was common for the industry at the time. This also reminded me of Target. I don't know how many of you remember the Target data breach from 2013. It was the end of 2013, and they lost, I think it was 40 million credit card and debit card numbers.
Ironically, since we're recording this in November, it was right around this time of year in 2013.
It was Thanksgiving, actually, that they were hit, and that's part of why the criminals managed to siphon away so many card numbers, because there were a lot of transactions occurring at the time. But that rocked the news. And I remember a lot of people saying at the time that Target security was terrible. But frankly, they were average, if not above average, for a retailer at the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, their security was not in line with best practices, but neither were most retailers and neither were most museums. So I think it's important to put that in context.
It is. I mean, so when we look at like the problems that the Louvre had, and I mean, there were a lot of them. Let's just be real about that. Like their security
we can
audit,
learn a lot from this.
The security audit in 2014 illustrated a lot of problems, but we have to also keep in mind that like the password Louvre, when we're talking about passwords back in 2014, you and I had a conversation about this earlier, and we have differing opinions on this.
I know.
You
I'm
thought
like ready
we were,
to go to bed.
Yeah, you thought passwords were going to be like, you know, way better and way more, you know, sophisticated. And I was a system admin in 2014, so I had to work with end users, and I knew for a fact at that point that they were not going to be. So,
well, and I know how excited you get about the Mirai botnet.
I do.
Do you want to tell us about that? Because that was like 2016, 2017 that criminals were still taking advantage of weak passwords in video surveillance and camera systems at a like massive scale.
Yeah, no, and there's an analog back to the Louvre when we talk about the Mirai botnet. So for those that don't remember, back in 2016, a massive botnet emerged called the Mirai botnet. And they
still around today.
Still around today. There's thousands of different variations of it at this point. But the big thing that they targeted were Internet of Things devices. So DVRs, camera systems, you know, things that you would have on the internet but not really consider to be a critical piece of your infrastructure, at least at that point in time. Now, more recently, I think people are paying more attention to them. But they thrived on the fact that with a lot of these devices, they either had very weak credentials or they had hard-coded credentials like admin that could not be changed. Right. And that was the big thing. Like, you couldn't update the firmware, you couldn't change the password, so if it was on the internet, you could break into it using that username and password basically whenever you wanted to. And Mirai, at its height, was in control of over 600,000 different devices all around the world.
Yeah,
and
so hackers scanned the internet and would automatically break into like camera systems and other systems that were out there that had those default credentials.
Right.
And then they used them.
And then they used them because they were, and the funny thing about it was, I mean, each one of those devices by itself is pretty inconsequential when we really think about it. But if you put 600,000 of them together, that means you can launch massive denial of service attacks from your fleet of devices at that point, and that's what they did. In 2017, they launched a mass denial of service attack against Dyn DNS, and that essentially took the internet offline.
And
that was a big deal.
Yeah. Well, and I remember doing a penetration test, it must have been 2014, 2015, where we broke in from the internet, we broke into this hospital's camera system, and we watched our physical pen tester walk in. So, because we were doing the external pen test and the internal pen test at the same time, and that really got everybody on the team. We thought that was funny to be able to watch him.
Well, I mean, we did that with the crypto mining camera experiment that we did too. Like, we were able to use the Mirai botnet, ironically, to break into nursery cameras, turn them into Monero miners. But while we were doing that, we noticed that we also gained access to the video feed and the audio feed. So we had complete control of the device at that point.
Yeah, you can see we have an article about that in Scientific American.
We do, yeah.
Back in the day.
That was a lot of fun.
Blast from the past. You know, about those passwords, one of them is Thales, as you mentioned. And who is Thales?
Thales is a security software manufacturer. They work with defense departments and governments and museums. And they were responsible for handling things like the security system, the camera system, and the authentication systems or identification systems that were being used by the museum at that point in time.
Well, they created those systems, and the museum purchased them in 2003. So, and they were very clear that they were not responsible for maintenance. That was delegated to a third party.
Yeah, no maintenance
but,
contract.
I mean, what struck me, I was like, who set that password? It almost certainly was not someone at the Louvre. They probably set the Louvre password, who knows? But usually it's the vendor that set the password.
It was probably whoever set that system up.
Yeah, whoever set the system up. And I think that really highlights the fact that we are dependent on our third-party vendors. And even today, we test healthcare organizations all the time. Manufacturers, even banks and credit unions have devices on the network that literally cannot be upgraded. And there's still times when the password cannot be changed.
Yeah.
Because you might have an organization that paid millions, multi-millions of dollars for a system like an MRI, or in the case of the Louvre, an analog surveillance system, and you just don't have the funds to upgrade that, and the vendor contracts do not have verbiage built in requiring them to upgrade the operating system.
Yeah, well, I mean, that gets around to one of the other findings from the 2014 audit of the Louvre, and that was the number of outdated systems that they had on the network. Like, they still had servers running Windows 2000 and Windows XP on the network, which was
in 2014.
Yeah, in 2014, which had been end of life 4 years prior to that. And again, that comes down to, and we saw the quote directly in a few of the other articles, I mean, they have multiple systems that just can't be upgraded. And that's not uncommon, especially as you were talking about when we look at healthcare or finance. I mean, some of these systems are built to run on very specific operating systems, but they're also expected to run for, a decade or so.
At least from a budgeting perspective.
From a budgeting perspective, yeah.
The manufacturer may be hoping that you upgrade more frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of incentives without pressure. There's not a lot of incentives sometimes for manufacturers to keep those systems working on modern operating systems because it's really a cost for them to try it out and to test it on new operating systems. And it also means you're not going to go procure a whole new system.
Yeah, exactly.
So you really want to have that baked into your vendor agreements from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, what else did you notice, Matt? You mentioned end-of-life operating systems.
Yeah, end-of-life operating systems. And again, this it's not necessarily unique to the Louvre. I mean, we run into this problem a lot.
We still see it today.
Oh, yeah. And again, it's because there are pieces of software that have to have specific operating systems to run. And if they don't, then, I mean, you can't port something that's built to run on, Windows Server 2012 directly into a modern Windows Server environment because they're not compatible with each other. So you have to, in some cases, you have to allow for an insecure piece of software like that to run on your network. And that's really where compensating controls come into place.
Yes.
And that was something that wasn't really discussed a lot in the Louvre report. I'd be curious to see in a more recent security assessment if they have something like that in place. But that's where we get into network segmentation. That's where we get into isolation. It's where we get into our own little siloed networks. Like we see hospitals.
A special segment of your network that hopefully nobody can get to.
Its own little secret place that ideally it can still run, but like it's not going to be a risk for you.
Well, this is relevant today also because in 2025, the Louvre did a security assessment, and there was, according to journalists, a list of 8 security programs that cannot be updated.
Yep.
So even today, there is that list of 8 programs, and a lot of it gets back to, I think they were, again, the analog video surveillance system and other systems that probably require some physical upgrades in order for the system to be fully up to date.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. I mean, to update those systems, you're basically looking at a full top-to-bottom infrastructure rebuild at that point.
Right.
And a lot of organizations can't or won't put forward the money to do that. That's a very expensive thing to accomplish.
Yeah, so why don't we jump in and talk about our key takeaways? I think there's a lot to be learned from the Louvre.
Yeah.
Again, take these reports with a grain of salt because you might see the headlines screaming like, the password was Louvre. And again, that's from over a decade before. But there's still a lot that we can learn from this. We just had a penetration test, I think yesterday or the day before here at LMG, where we gained access to a client's network using a password based on the World Series. And we did that using password spraying. So we came up with this weak password, and one of our penetration testers, Derek, actually sprayed that password, tried it one time on every single account. So you're not locked out if you try it one time on every single account for this financial institution.
Yep.
And one user, which happened to be a domain user, and I think even a domain admin, had that password. And as a result, we were able to ultimately get a full domain admin on the network. Yeah,
that's not strange, though. And this is why the number one takeaway that we have here, or the first takeaway, is to audit for those weak or shared passwords.
Yes, exactly.
Like you have to do that. And our pen testers talk about this all the time. If we're in a big enough network, and they do a password spray like that, if they use company name 1 or if they use season year exclamation point, there's a pretty good chance they're going to crack an account that way because, again, we tend to be kind of bad with passwords. It's just, kind of a thing.
Human nature.
Hopefully really
we can replace passwords with something else. I would not have expected after 25 years that we were still relying on passwords.
Sure. No, it makes sense. But again, look for those weak passwords. Look for shared passwords, ones that multiple people know or multiple people use, or password reuse across multiple different services. I mean,
and manage your vendor passwords as well. Make sure they're not picking weak passwords for your system. So audit those.
I've worked with MSPs who use the exact same password for every single one of their clients. So if they get busted, all of their clients get busted too.
That happens.
It's pretty rough. Yeah.
Okay, conduct regular penetration tests and make sure you are tracking remediation. So here in the case of the Louvre, we see these security assessments, and then I think part of why people are up in arms is that it's clear that those weren't remediated in a timely manner. There's a lot of evidence of that. So it's really important to test annually if you can, and then make sure you're remediating those. What we started to do with our clients is actually have meetings regularly so that your IT team doesn't get stuck. So whether it's every week or every other week or every month, just doing a check-in, seeing where you are at, having that third party moving things forward, and being able to talk directly to hackers and say, hey, is this resolved? Or are you still seeing this as an issue? And then that way the hackers can check it. And make sure it's not still an issue.
Well, I mean, that's not uncommon either. We've seen multiple data breaches where A company gets hit with a significant cyber attack, and as regulators or attorneys or something come in to investigate how it happened, they start looking at those previous security reports, and they see those recommendations that were just not taken care of.
And it's a huge liability.
Yeah,
so yeah, moving that forward is really important.
Yep.
Make sure that you are vetting and contractually binding your third-party vendors.
Huge.
I think we're still dealing with the fallout of contractual issues today, where a lot of companies invested 10, 15 years ago in these really expensive systems and did not require the vendors to upgrade the underlying platforms.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're including those in your contracts so that you don't find yourself in a bind.
Right. The next thing we want to make sure of is that you're integrating both your IT and your physical security, because there is a link between those two things. And if you're treating those as silos, if your camera systems or your badges or your alarm systems aren't integrated and aren't being maintained correctly and aren't in line with your IT security practices, then you're giving yourself a big open space for potential risk at that point. I mean, it really just comes down to it. So again, make sure there's that synergy between those two elements of your network.
Yep. Plan for legacy system containment. So if you have systems that can't be upgraded, make sure you're segmenting, you're treating them with kid gloves, so that if there's malware or an attacker on your network or even just an insider, they can't compromise them, even though you know that they're very high risk.
Yeah.
So segment according to risk.
We mentioned before, I mean, there's times when things just can't be upgraded or updated without significant financial or time investments. So if you're going to have them, make sure you know about them first and foremost, and make sure that they are protected in ways that your other pieces of the network might not be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Create a continuous audit and feedback loop. So what do we mean by
this? So what we want to do, and this goes back to like the pen testing and findings and recommendations. I mean, make sure that when you are looking at actually completing those tasks and remediating those vulnerabilities, that you're assigning ownership, that you're tracking whether or not that has actually been taken care of, and that you're running it to ground, making sure that the tasks are actually completed. I mean, we don't want to leave gaping holes on a network, and I mean, we see this with pen tests where we see the same vulnerabilities pop up year on year on year.
Yeah,
it's just because they never get taken care of, and that's a huge risk.
Yeah, and very common, unfortunately. Can I add one that we hadn't talked about?
Certainly.
Control your media communications.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, again, it looks really bad for the Louvre that these security reports have been leaked to the public. And I'd be curious to know, were they leaked from the company or the organization that did the assessment?
Mm-hmm.
Were they leaked from a third party? Were they leaked from the Louvre itself? Did the Louvre get hacked and they were leaked? Hopefully not. But really, I mean, make sure you understand who has access to sensitive reports of this type and that everybody is trained to keep internal information internal.
That's really huge.
I think some of the hardest things we see are when a company gets attacked, then all of a sudden this information becomes public and they lose, at least in the court of public opinion and sometimes in a court of law.
Like Target, you mean?
Yeah, and lots of other organizations. So with that, thank you so much. What a fascinating case.
This is really interesting. I'm curious to see where we go from here.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a lot more information coming out over the next few weeks and months. So stay tuned, and thank you so much for joining us here on Cyberside Chats. We'll see you next week.